Hi there! This story is about a time when I ran into trouble during freshman year at college. I took advice from friends and followed it. I am curious to know, what would you have advised me? So, I have always been a total night owl, and I had these really early classes. That's a clear sign of trouble in the making. I just couldn't handle waking up at 7 a.m. to study. I'd rather stay up super late working on my homework and stuff than get out of bed when the sun is rising. This is me, Sally, and I am sure many of you watching here can relate to me. The problem is, I got into this mess exactly because I always sleep late. When the enrollment day arrived and I completely overslept, that meant that by the time I got there, well, all the best spots and classes were taken. I didn't want to miss a semester because of my lack of responsibility, so I decided to man up to my mistake. But before we go on with the story, take a second to click on the subscribe button. This will give you 5 years of good luck. You might even win the lottery, who knows? Trust me, it totally works. At first, it wasn't too hard. I drank a lot of coffee and kept myself awake. Somehow, I even managed to get into bed rather early and not turn and toss for hours at a time. But it ended up being just like when you make your New Year's Eve resolution, you know? I started super confident and filled with determination. I was going to prove to everyone that I could make it. When I told my mom about it, she laughed and said, "Sally, I could barely wake you up when you were in primary school. How are you going to manage to get those classes without someone nagging you for half an hour?" "Mom, I'm a grown-up now," I protested, feeling super offended. This made my determination grow even stronger. I was going to prove my mom wrong. I bought a brand new clock. I set up my cell phone with different morning tunes. I even downloaded one of those apps that help you develop good habits. Really, I tried it all. Drink a glass of water when I just woke up. Have a small dinner. Keep my phone on the nightstand once I got into bed. And yet, after about 3 or 4 weeks, my resolve began to falter. I began pressing the snooze button once too often, and then dragged myself around campus trying to wake up fully. I even fell asleep during a lesson once. You better believe that didn't turn out well. I was totally paying attention to the professor, and suddenly, my eyelids began feeling heavy. I blinked once, then twice, and suddenly, I felt like I was floating. "Sally!" I heard someone barking at me, and I looked up, stunned. The whole class was staring at me, and some were snickering under their breaths. Others gave me disapproving frowns. I blushed all over and gulped, staring at the teacher. He looked incredibly mad, his arms crossed before his chest. "I didn't know tuition included nap time during classes," he scolded me, and suddenly I felt like a child. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled, biting my lower lip. "It won't happen again." "Next time, you'll be asked to leave," he warned me, before going back to the lesson. Believe me, I kept my eyes wide open, scared to fall asleep again. I felt like if I did, the professor's head was going to explode. And worse still, I was going to get an F for sure, no matter how much I studied. Now, if my roommate had shared my schedule, it would have been far easier. Harper was an incredibly responsible student. She was a straight-A student and super neat. Harper would have made sure I woke up every single morning with her cleaning and moving around the room. The thing was, she had gotten there early during registration day, obviously, and none of her classes began before 12 p.m. That meant I couldn't rely on her schedule to keep me from messing up. When midterm exam season came along, I began staying up really late studying. It was when I was the most alert, and managed to get far more done. So when the math exam came along, I stayed up all night, cramming up as much information as possible. I knew the teacher didn't like me. Remember the professor that scolded me like a child that one time? So I had to try my best, and don't give him any excuse to lower my grades. I sat at my desk, head stuck in a book, reading and reading, taking down notes, and memorizing whole formulas. By the time I got too exhausted to keep studying any longer, I crawled up to my bed. You see, to save space, my roommate and I had gotten ourselves bunk beds. I slept in the top bunk, and so I climbed up the small stairs by the side of the bed. I felt my eyes heavy and red. Knowing I couldn't afford to oversleep, I set up like 4 alarms and checked them twice before closing my eyes. I fell asleep almost at once, super exhausted. Really, I was sure nothing could go wrong. After all, I had taken so many preventative measures, right? Or that's what I thought, until I heard Harper's voice excitedly asking, "Oh, you're back! How did it go in your exam then? Was it as hard as you thought?" I opened my eyes, super confused, and stuck my head over the edge of my bed. "What are you talking about, H? I haven't even taken it yet," I replied. She was still in her pajamas and looked a bit sleepy. Perhaps she had just gotten up to use the toilet or something? My alarms clearly hadn't rung yet. "Sally, it's 10 a.m. I'm just getting up. I thought you would come back from the exam and decided to take a nap," she replied, looking surprised and worried. Believe me, I jumped on my bed, feeling a rush of adrenaline run through my body. I went immediately pale and gulped, horrified by what Harper had just said. "What?" I screamed, climbing down the stairs so fast I almost stumbled. Managing to keep my balance, I stood beside my roommate, totally freaking out. It can't be 10 a.m. I had so many alarms on. I checked the clock, and of course it really was that late. Why would Harper mess with me with a prank like that? When I picked up my alarm clock, I realized that I had hit snooze while half asleep so many times that it had actually stopped ringing. "Oh my god, what am I going to do?" I yelped, feeling my eyes filling with tears. I'll fail math, and I studied so hard. I sat down on Harper's bed and grabbed my head with both hands, feeling hopeless. "Maybe you'll be allowed to take the makeup exam?" Harper suggested, sitting down next to me and patting my shoulder encouragingly. "I don't know if the professor will allow me to. I already fell asleep once, during a lesson. He will be so mad that he'll fail me for sure," I replied, my voice trembling as I spoke. "Well, what if you don't tell him you overslept?" she suggested, speaking very low like it was a big secret. I stared at her with wide eyes. Harper was a goody two-shoes. She never ever did anything that was against the rules. And yet, here she was, suggesting I should lie, in order to get a second chance. I would have never imagined she'd be the one to tell me to do that. What if he doesn't believe me? Then I'll be stuck in an even worse situation than before, H, I replied, but the idea was already rolling in my head. Could I get away with it? Was it possible for me to get a second chance by lying and pretending I had some kind of emergency? "Well, it's not what I'd usually recommend, but I don't see any other way around it," she replied, shrugging. "Look, I have to get dressed and go to class. Just think about it." I nodded quietly and saw her get ready and leave, still sitting there, feeling super lost. What could I do? I didn't want to go to my teacher's office right away. If I had some kind of emergency, after all, I wouldn't be able to get there until much later. But if I overslept, it was better to run there and apologize at once, right? It was so hard to make a decision, and I needed to make it super quickly. I grabbed my cell phone and asked myself who could give me a piece of good advice. If I called my mom, I already knew what she'd tell me. "You are so irresponsible, Sally. I told you that you weren't ready to take these classes, and tuition is so expensive. Your father and I are doing a big effort paying for it so you don't have to take on any student loans." I cringed at the idea of hearing those words. I felt so guilty already. So no, I couldn't call my mother. And my father was also completely out of the question. He was even stricter than Mom. I scrolled through my contact list and finally found Jamie, one of my friends from college. He was in a fraternity and often woke up with a massive hangover. Surely he had faced this kind of problem once or twice at least. So I called him and heard the phone ring. And ring. And ring. I sighed, thinking he must still be asleep. But finally, when I was about to hang up, I heard him pick up the phone. "Hi, Sally," he greeted me with a sleepy voice. Yeah, I had been right. He was sleeping, and I had woke him up. "What's up?" "Hi, Jamie. Sorry I woke you up. It's kind of an emergency," I replied, and began explaining the whole situation. There was a pause on the other side of the line when I stopped talking. He seemed to be thinking about it. "Well, I would go to the professor's office and explain the situation. Tell him you feel very sorry, you studied really hard, and would really appreciate a makeover exam. Admit that you were wrong, and appeal to his empathy," he replied. And I was surprised by how level-headed he sounded. It was so odd. The responsible girl suggested I lied, and the frat boy was telling me to be honest. I felt like I was stuck on the opposite ends. "He might tell me no," I squealed, so worried I'd have to redo the whole class the following year.
Yeah, he might.
He yawned, and I sighed. But if you lie and he catches you, it'll be worse. He might even suspend you. So, I guess you have to take a chance and hope he is in a good mood today. Maybe even take him a cup of coffee or something? I don't want him to think I'm flirting or trying to bribe him, I protested, and he laughed. Well, then just go empty-handed and look miserable. That should work too, he replied, and I thanked him for his advice. After hanging up, I got dressed and began pacing up and down my bedroom, trying to make up my mind. I felt like I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. One way or another, I'm kind of screwed. I followed Frat Boy's advice and stayed honest. I was allowed to do a makeup exam, but the grade was reduced as a punishment. The important thing is, I succeeded in the end, and didn't have to repeat the class. By the way, I am still working on my sleeping schedule. What would you do if you were stuck in such a situation? Let me know your opinion in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out other videos on the channel.